Welcome back, listeners, to part 2 of episode 3, Keys to the Gym. We were joined for this segment with Coach Bob Montana, who is the first of the 3 generations here in the Montana family here in the game of basketball. We kicked off the conversation really about some background into Coach Montana. We talked a little bit about how the game is evolving and got into a great conversation around commitment. And so we're going to pick right back up where we left off. We hope you enjoy the rest of episode 3, Keys to the Gym. We're bringing 3 generations to you today.
It's in our blood. Keys to the gym, our family's love.
A number of times different to this point in the conversation, commitment, willingness to commit has come up. And so again, I'm deviating a little here from some of the things we've talked about, but how does commitment show up, right, in a program, right? So you've talked about like the commonalities across programs, regardless of we're talking about the women's game or the men's game, and we look at programs, on the surface, I think probably say, geez, that obviously we've got great players. We always laugh about it. You got to have the Jimmies and the Joes as well as the X's and those. But I think there's so many other things that if you were inside a program, in any program, inside a program that you could identify, that's what commitment looks like. So what might be some of those things that if you were, assessing, getting a chance to be a fly on the wall inside of a program that has continuously, and we talk about this all the time, the range is pretty narrow, right? To the high note, to the bottom, right? So there's not these big swings, and, every so often, I guess that can happen, but like hitting the high note and the bottom are pretty tight. What might be some things that you feel like show up in a program that sustains success and they're committed to it?
Again, I guess it goes back a little bit to the teaching experience I had early in my career. I think any of us who've been in a classroom as a student or as a teacher, you kind of understand what commitment is because you begin to realize who's actually doing the above and beyond. Are they sitting in class and taking some notes and then closing the notebook? Are they going home? Are they doing the extra reading? Are they doing, taking time to go back over their notes so that the next day in class, they're more engaged? So it's all those little things. And I guess for me, it comes back to those 2 words, work ethic. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean, say in our game that, you're going to do some shooting drills and 2 days later, you're going to be one of the best shooters on the team. But it's really your commitment and the respect you have for people who day in and day out are really working hard to try to grow themselves individually. And then the effort that they're putting in physically, whether it's a defensive drill, again, a ball handling drill, but some of those other things, it's almost, I don't want to, use the old phrase. It's hard to define it, but you know it when you see it. But there is a little of that. I think for me, it comes back to work ethic. If somebody's really staying pretty disciplined and they're a good student, they're really paying attention, that kind of shows me commitment. And again, if you're engaged when you're on the bench, and that doesn't mean you got to be cheering the loudest. It's just got to mean that, I'm there and, a teammate comes off the court, maybe after a good run or not so good run, patting them on the back, saying, well done. Just so that's what the commitment looks like for me.
Okay. Well, I think that, the other pieces that I feel like you can observe, and I agree with your point about sort of, when you see it. But there are clearly some programs out there that, we've all, the UConns of the world have been repeatedly chronicled. But I do think it's interesting to watch, teams and programs, how they engage with one another, and, you look at South Carolina with Dawn Staley, like there's clearly a standard, there's clearly an expectation, and they have not been willing, at least, as you observe it from a fan's perspective, they have clearly not been willing to give into or justify, well, we're going to give a break on that kid or this kid. No, like you're going to adhere to a standard. You're going to play and adhere to what we're trying to do. And obviously we got a pretty nice, as probably as an inside look as we're going to ever get from that special that featured their program to see that, right. To see that. And if you're not going to maintain that standard, like your role may not be what you want, or you may not have the opportunities you want. And they've exited players, and those players have gone on and been fine, but it wasn't a fit. And I think when you can see that from a program that's 3 national titles now.
Yes. That's not an accident.
That's there's no accident there. No. I mean, people have talked about like what, Gino's been chronicled about, like, hey, we can recruit some of the most talented players in the world. And as a result of that, maybe their evaluation's a little easier because there's only going to be a certain range of kids they're going to talk to. And the thing that then separates it for them is the other pieces, really more makeup types of things.
Well, I would always, when alums would ask me, well, so what do you think of the recruiting class? I would always say, I'll let you know in January, because at that point, we're now a few months through practice. They've had some highs and lows, and how are they reacting to that? And sometimes it's just as challenging reacting to the highs as it might be to the lows. A point that you made, whether it's, the standard that Dawn Staley has created at South Carolina. I think of other standards. And again, I'm not saying everybody should be playing the same way or anything like that, but you look at a guy like Tony Bennett, who I happen to be a fan of, and I know there's people who are critical of the way they play. But when a kid goes on the floor at Virginia, they're going to defend at a certain level. They're going to defend with a certain philosophy. They're going to run offense with a certain approach and philosophy, and everybody is going to do that. You're not going to have one guy go out there and he's all of a sudden going to be doing something different. So, kind of going back to the bad comment I made about, well, you can't always define it. It comes back to your willingness and the work ethic to say, yeah, like, okay, you want to make sure I'm coloring between the lines? Okay, coach, I'm going to color between the lines. That doesn't mean that Tony Bennett doesn't like guys to dunk it. It's not like, it doesn't mean any of those things. He enjoys big plays as much as anybody, but there's a certain standard in those levels. And going back to your comment about Gino, and I kind of touched on it, my response to our alums when they would ask me, that you don't always know in your recruiting process and in your regular contact, you think you have a pretty good feel for the player you're recruiting, but until they're there and in the trenches and have had those good days and not so good days and see how they respond, you never really know. And what's going to be their approach when they get knocked down, do they get back up? That's that commitment to the team that we all look for.
All right, well, I think we've reached a point here. We're going to make a little transition. PG, you're coming to us each week with some thoughts from yourself, right? And so we're going to make our way into 2 Feet in the Paint with the PG. And so what do you have for us this week?
So this week I wanted to focus on what I call are the daily vitamins. These are things that I do every time I go to the gym and work out. These 3 things, starting with form shooting every single time. I mean, episode 1, we talked about the first time I went to the gym and we just shot form shot after form shot. Just making sure that when I do step back and shoot threes, maybe not threes, but even longer twos, that my shot stays the same. I mean, Curry, obviously, I mean, he's doing foam shooting every single day. I mean, he even talks about it. And he's one of the best shooters of all time, I would say. So that's the first thing. I mean, we also do a lot of ball handling, and we work on change of direction, pace, and height. So change of direction, like between the legs, cross behind the back. I've been working a lot on my change of speed. So normally every time we go to work out, we're doing more change of speed things. I like to just go 100 miles per hour. So we've been working on like making sure I can freeze, hezzy, that's the second thing. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was finishing around the basket. We usually do a lot of like finishing, like flicking at the basket using a spin, getting the ball to touch the top of the backboard. Finishing with both hands is important, and being able to use different finishes in different situations is important. So we do that every time we work out. But those three things are what I would consider my daily vitamins.
So watching, we'll talk about this a little bit more, I know, but one of the other things that I think can be really challenging, but if you can be effective at it, can be freeing for a point guard, someone who certainly has to facilitate and manage, flow of game, flow of pace. But you had made a note about this idea of also handling in tight spaces, right? We talk about it, mm-hmm. You and I, oftentimes about being able to probe, right? It's a ball handler being able to attack and then respond to, tight spaces being created for them, but still being able to get through. I think Courtney Williams did a terrific job of that the other mm-hmm. night, as being able to like operate inside the middle of the floor, inside the 3-point line, and keep play moving without making a decision that ended up being, functionally a turnover, either mm-hmm. a bad shot creation. So I think that's also been something that you've been spending some time on. But we put a challenge out. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
I would agree with you on that. I mean, I'm very like, if I'm going, I'm going. I usually don't, like you say, keep my dribble in tight spaces. So working on being able to like maybe retreat dribble back out behind the three to reset. So not really committing to something in the middle of the play, but great points.
So we put a challenge out to some listeners last week about getting back into the gym or court or Y or blacktop and getting a pickup game. Pops, this was something that you talked about earlier about some things that have evolved or changed and are different in today. There's just a lot more organization. But so if you got 2 pickup games in this week, maybe reflect for us on what those experiences were like, what you're, how maybe, so maybe things you learned about yourself and, or, from those experiences. So you want to share a little bit more about those experiences?
Was it Thursday or Friday? Was it Thursday?
Yeah, it was Thursday morning. When we went into the Y.
Thursday morning, we went into the Y, and I got a pickup game with the old heads, as you called them, the big boys. And I thought it was, obviously they weren't really like fast paced, like running up and down, like obviously they weren't doing that. So it was a little bit change of pace for me. My AU team is very go, lots of transition, lots of throw aheads to score. So it was a little bit of a change for me. Obviously I'm this little minion coming in, trying to get in a game. At first they were a little bit, but they were welcoming, and I was able to, got a few opportunities to score at the basket. That first opportunity was good. And then on Saturday, I was able to get a couple of my teammates to play some 2-on-2 and 3v3, which obviously playing 3v3 is really good. It's a lot more spacing, a lot more 2-man action than I would say my AAU team does with 5-on-5. So those two pickup games really, I do think, helped and changed my perspective a little bit.
So here are a few observations that I had, and these are just observations I feel like I can make a little bit because I did play a lot of pickup on the playground when, there were those opportunities, as well as having access and being on campus summers with some college players being around, or, lunchtime games, or there was always a game I felt like we had access to. But here's some observations I had in watching you Thursday morning. Now there's a group of guys that come into the Y. It was almost, we started going pretty regularly to the Y in the morning just to get some extra work in for you. And it was actually refreshing to see, some older guys. And I say older guys, it's kind of hard for me to assess now that I'm making my way into those, a different, we always talk about stages of life, a little different stage of life. I'd be stretching for quite a while, probably before getting out on the floor. But, and being really encouraged by the fact that, like, here's some guys probably anywhere from late 20s to maybe early 50s. And they were getting runs in a couple mornings a week at like 6 a.m. Right. So like, I give them credit, like, it was encouraging. So anyway, so you're lacing up your shoes, and there was a group of guys that were they had 9. They're like, hey, we need one more. And they kind of looked at me and I'm like, well, she'll run. Right. And so you laced them up and got out on their 4. So I'm sitting there watching. And here's the things that going through my head, like, no matter what, and this gets to Pops' point, no matter what, impact winning, right? So like they engaged you as one of the 5 on the floor without any question, right? So like there'd be opportunities like, hey, that's your shot, go get it. Like, don't hesitate, take the first one. So there was a lot of encouragement along the way, but also like there were, if you missed the shot, my hope was, and I don't usually have this hope too much because usually you do compete every time you step on the floor, you compete in pretty much everything we do. It's like, just get back and defend, right? Get a tip out, get a rebound, right? Make sure that you're playing the other roles. And I think that's the benefit. Now, that's why those things are really important. I think your team went 2-2. So it was a pretty even matchups both ways. But like, can I impact winning on any court or game I get myself into? Now, you did that from what I could, from my observations. But to your point, here's how I think this is really important. You acknowledge this, right? Your AAU team has a very defined system of play. Coach Carter has had a lot of success in playing that way, and your team has had a lot of success. You defend people, you get after them, right? You're looking to advance the ball quickly and create opportunities, right? And you guys have had a lot of success that way. But here's where playing pickup for you, I think, is really important. And I think this is important for a lot of players. Catching the ball, off the ball, squaring, reading my defender, and working on things that you're not working on or always getting the same reps in some of the other teams you've played on in the last year. And you did those things. So the game was played at a different speed, but it was also played at a speed where, like, hey, I got to be able to attack my defender. And I got to be able to move without the ball. Honestly, you talk about how the game wasn't played at this crazy pace. I saw 45 cuts. I saw backdoors. I saw screen set for different players. And I saw passes being made when players made cuts. It was almost, to me, it was one of the most pure forms of the game. So whether you're 15 or 55 or 65, I saw a bunch of people on the floor who understood how to play the game. And that is really good, because if you don't know how to play the game, guess who's and I guarantee this, unfortunately, you weren't in the situation because I do think you've got pretty good feel. But those other people on your team, if you don't have feel, guess who's going to hear about it? The player who doesn't understand how to play. And guess what? The next time that there's a game to be picking up players, guess who's not getting picked up? That player. And this is to Pops' point. You quickly start to figure out, like, hey, can this person play a little bit? Can this person make sure that we're staying on the winning side of the scoreboard? Because you were fortunate the other morning, it was just 10, but there were other mornings where there are 7 and 8 people waiting to get in the game. And guess what? Everybody who's in there playing has got to be out that door by a certain time because they got to go to work. We got to go to whatever. So I think you were challenged to like just go play
Mm-hmm.
and figure out like, can I contribute? And then to your point about playing 2s and 3s, like 2s and 3s, guess what? You can't hide. So yeah, on the one hand, you got a lot more space to operate, but you're going to lose if you can't contribute. And people are going to, the people you're going to play against, they're going to figure that out. So those are just some of my observations.
Sorry.
No, I'm just
you
gonna
go, Pops.
Make a couple of comments. First of all, when you were talking about assessing the ages of people out there and that kind of thing, I kind of, maybe I'm bragging, I was feeling good about the fact that, the summer before your senior year in college, that I was able to get out and still play a little pickup in games that you could be in that were going to be helpful to you going into your senior year of college as a college athlete. But that's a nonsensical thought. But you think about those guys playing in that pickup game. And one of the things I touched on a couple times today was about playing for the right reasons. Those people out there, yourself included, all playing for the right reasons. Nobody's going to check the box score to see who scored what. It's all going to be about we're doing this because we like to play. And they're usually, the majority of those people, if they like to play, probably have a feel. And to kind of, hammer at an old cliche, motion offense is one of those things you don't understand until you get to be 30. Because you're not usually creating as much for yourself at a certain age. But anyway, I think that was terrific, Soph, that you had that opportunity. Sounded like guys were pretty committed to winning.
Oh yeah. They were. Yeah. Adding to your point on the 2v2s, Dad, I also think it's a lot harder defensively. Because it's just the two of you. On a screen, like one miscommunication, that's a layup. Like there's no backside help. It's just the two of you on defense. So it kind of forced me to talk even more than I already do. So that challenged me in a way as well.
All right. So here's the real question. So since I wasn't in the gym to watch that game on Saturday, how were you guarding those screens? So how were we guarding ball screens? Were we fighting over the top, or were we were dropping?
Well,
how were we guarding
those? It depends. If I was the one getting screened, I was fighting over the top. But if I was the one if my player was screening my team, I'm jumping the screen. Like I'm going to say I'm jumping. Because that's one of the things I love to do. It's one of my favorite parts about playing defense. Jumping handoffs or jumping screens, like seeing the look on their face, like when I jump the screen, it's hilarious. But if my player's screening my teammate, I'm jumping it. But if my player's getting screened, I'm fighting over the top.
All right. Very good. Very good. Yeah. I just think, go ahead, Pops.
Yeah, those are all great things. Because it's just like in practice, you'll work on guarding 1-on-1. You'll work on guarding 2-on-2, 3-on-3. So like you said, in some of those situations, there's going to be help based on whatever your philosophy of help is. Is it a hard hedge? Is it drop coverage? Whatever. But it kind of forces you to, again, even if it's 1-on-1, or 2-on-2, and a screen is coming, are you turning the ball handler away from the screen? Are you just, again, either going over or going under? But that's all great stuff. So great stuff.
Yeah. So I think that's the challenge, right? And the challenge is there's so much to be gained. We got to continue to encourage others to, who are, whether folks who are listening or folks we're connected to, I just think there's so much to be gained from that. I think sometimes the challenge of, obviously getting a chance to work with some younger players, when you're just in an organized situation all the time, I can imagine as a player, it's like everything I'm doing is always someone helping me, trying to facilitate my learning, trying to provide some teaching and instruction. But like, you don't always get, I think sometimes we have a tendency, especially younger players, developing players, they lose that intrinsic, like I just enjoy playing. you know? And I think the game, we would take the game a long way given all that's happening in the game today. And we obviously earlier, I think the business of the game, there's been such benefit and how that has elevated and created visibility, especially in this era of social media and TV access and all that sort of thing. I think there's so much benefit to opportunities. But I think when we strip away the organization, if there was none of that, how many people would be playing today? And I think we've got to try to find ways to encourage folks to just get out and learn, right? Can I be reflective? That's something that you and I challenge you on all the time, is just like, be reflective. Like, and you just did it, right? You just talked about it. I think so. You're getting some learnings from those experiences, as well as having some fun with it, and working on things that you're trying to get better at. But we strip away some of that organization. We strip away some of the like, hey, we're trying to today in practice, I'm just trying to take you all from here to here. But when you don't have those other free opportunities, what's your perspective on that? And it's interesting, right? So, the game of the week this week was Aces and Lynx. And it was the Wednesday night game in particular. We watched the Friday night game as well, but they had, with the schedule the way it is, they had a turnaround 48 hours later and played again. And the Lynx won again. And the Lynx, I was just so impressed by, and we'll get into this, but the thing that struck me, and this is something that all three of us talked about, and I shared this quote that stuck out with me. So, I hate the silly coaches interviews. I don't know anybody who's listening feels about these, but this has become such a part of the entertainment part. It's like, hey, we got to interview players and coaches at different points of the game. So they interviewed Becky Hammond about midway through the third quarter, and the Aces were down probably about 10. I'm going to say 10. And they're asking her, well, coach, what do you think? What are some things that y'all you need to do better? How do you think the team needs to adjust? And this is her quote, word for word. We need to have players stop begging for the ball. And we need to have some players pass the ball just to pass the ball. And I thought, here you have a bunch of professionals who've been playing for years, right? And the Aces have had a great organization. They've won a couple of titles, right? And that's her comment a little more than halfway through the game. And I remember sitting there making notes and saying, like, goodness, like the ball just seems to stick and there's no fluidity to their game. But anyway, I wanted to kind of throw that out there as sort of a tee up to the conversation about the game this week that we wanted to focus in on. But what were your thoughts?
I thought offensively, the Aces were very stagnant off the ball. Whereas the Lynx, they were a lot of away screens, a lot of flare screens. There's a lot more movement. Whereas the Aces, they're a lot more ISO based. And I really don't think they got the ball into Asia Wilson enough to to play that way against the Lynx. So I think that's what caused the Aces to lose to them twice.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, right? So Asia Wilson, she's touted as probably being this year's MVP. She's had another incredible year, just impact. But sometimes the ball getting to certain spots on the floor into certain players' hands, even if they are not the one who ultimately makes the scoring play, it creates opportunities for others. And there was a lot of one pass to an attempted drive. The ball was really stagnant. There were a couple of rotations, and I thought in the first quarter, the Aces' best rotation at that time was Plum, Chelsea Gray, Clark, Wilson, and Hayes. And so they had three or at least two players off the bench, and it was about role because they weren't coming in expecting to be the primary focus, but they could make the next pass. They were willing to to make sure that the ball was getting to the right spots, and they became much more effective because the Lynx jumped out too. I mean, in the first quarter, they had 14 made field goals and 12 assists.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, in the first half, not the first quarter. They had 14 made field goals, 12 assists. And I know sometimes it can sometimes be a little misleading, but for the Lynx as a team, and you watch them play, and I watched them play 3 times last week, got 3 W's against, the Aces twice. And then a young, but growing Fever team. They were consistently playing that way. ball movement, player movement at a premium. So it was kind of interesting to see that. But the Aces really struggled with that. And it had me thinking. I made a note to go back and, they were fourth this week going into this week's play. They were fourth in the standings, and thinking like, how is their roster different this year from last year? And off the top of my head, I couldn't recall what differences there were in terms of maybe there's a piece difference. But now I will say Kate Martin didn't play at all.
No.
And I think she's still battling an injury because she went down right before the Olympic break. And then they also had some bad matchups on the perimeter and at the forward spot. The Lynx are very long, and they shoot it as a group, really well. Shoot it incredibly well. So anyway, those are just some of my initial thoughts about the game opening up.
I mean, the Plum and Courtney Williams matchup was like, Courtney Williams ate her up like all over the floor, like defensively, offensively. I mean, obviously Plum still affected the game. I mean, she's very good, but Courtney Williams, especially her mid-range, like Plum could not guard her at that spot. So I thought that affected the game tremendously.
Just commenting on Hammond's comments, which, as you said, were terrific and so concise, that sometimes players, that's something you have to remind people, that passing the basketball is a tactic in the game, and not necessarily just passing it to an open player for a shot, but every time the ball moves, the defense has to adjust their stance. The more times they adjust their stance, the more likely you are to get an open shot. Now you add in that player movement. I think when you're playing pickup, one of your goals should be, I want to be the person on the floor that nobody wants to guard. And it's not necessarily tied to just the fact that I can make a lot of shots, but they're going to have to be moving all the time, because I'm going to be a good cutter. I'm going to be a good screener. I'm going to be moving, not to clutter a side of the floor, but to open up a side of the floor. And again, what I'm trying to do is force that defense to adjust their stance as many times as possible. We lose sight that passing is an actual tactic in the game.
Well, there's a lot of conversation, and it's about, here in North Carolina, there's no shot clock in the game, period. Right. And that's different from state to state. And obviously you get to college, you got a 30-second shot clock, and at the professional level, playing with a 24-second shot clock. And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, this system of play doesn't work because you only have X number of seconds to execute and create scoring situations, for lack of a better term. And, your own experience is typically your own experiences personally shape kind of your perspective on the game. And, I have a perspective which has been shaped by, in many cases, the experiences I had growing up and watching the way Pops coached and the things that were valued. And then really the teams that I felt like consistently were successful or prioritized certain things about makeup of players. And so being really focusing in on ball movement, player movement, and liking the ball to get from side to side and then deep to create some action, like, whether we're talking motion or two guard or read and react, whatever it is, this idea that there's not enough, even at the professional level, there's not enough time in the possession to create advantages in that way or to make defenses work or move. And there was a video I saw this week. It was from someone, a proponent for, read and react, which is, conceptually it's motion, and showing a clip of Iowa and, this idea. And it was the whole thing like, okay, we're playing with 30 seconds, and within the shot clock, 30-second shot clock, with 10 seconds left on the shot clock, they got a great scoring opportunity, and they had the ball really, they made the defense work. So, I think there's sometimes some misunderstanding And maybe it comes down to philosophy. And hey, there are lots of different ways to get where we're going with an organization. Lots of systems of play, to use the language Pops was using earlier. But watching those two teams be on the floor, and I wouldn't say necessarily that the Aces don't desire to achieve those same things, but at least in that matchup on that particular night, one team was executing it perfectly and the other one was not. Mm-hmm. And that was the difference in the game. That was really the difference in the game. To your point, so Courtney Williams was terrific. I just thought her impact, and Plum admitted it. Her post-game comments were just saying, like, I whether I wasn't prepared or didn't respond or didn't read it right, like, had no answer for the way that she impacted the game. And her mid-range scoring, right, was terrific. Mm-hmm. But I think this was an example of impacting winning. There was a possession in, I think, the third quarter. On the same possession, Courtney Williams goes up and tips twice, gets tip outs. Yeah. And so they miss one shot, miss a second shot. She tips out both of those rebounds, right? Never, so doesn't get blocked out, doesn't get impeded. Mm-hmm. And so the third shot turns into a three. Yeah. Bang, right? And now the momentum again has changed in the favor of the Lynx. And those are the things, like, she was just tough, to Pops' point about being the player in pickup who no one wants to guard. Like, it wasn't that Courtney Williams was just such a beast offensively. Like, she just impacted winning on both ends of the floor the entire game. And in fact, there were times where, hey, you gotta rotate players. You gotta give players a break. So she was out. Her rotation was out, and when she was out and Nafisa Collier was out, the game was totally different for the Lynx. Yeah. That was actually moments where so anyway, those are some things that stood out to me, and it was just sort of a tale of two different evenings for those teams. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts from you in terms of what you saw or what stood out to you in that game?
No, I think we pretty much did everything.
All right. Well, I want to give a special shout out and thanks for Pops for joining us this week for this segment. We're excited to welcome him into the fold. I don't know. I think for myself and for the PG, the first of what we believe will be many conversations. So, the agenda stays pretty busy for Pop. So as he is in this, what we refer to the vacation stage of life, we know that it'll be tough for us to draw him into the agenda. So if we can get him in at least once a month, I think that would be a win for us. What do you think, PG?
I think that would be awesome.
Now, what's funny, I think, for most coaches is while there may be a vacation stage for coaches, he stays pretty readily in the gym. Somehow, as coaches, you kind of continue to find your way into the gym, being around in a lot of practices. So hopefully we can stay on the monthly agenda. But want a shout out and a thanks for Pops for joining us this week. We really appreciate it. You joining the conversation.
I'm very fortunate to have made a lot of good friends. So I am fortunate to find my ways into the gym. I love the title of your podcast, Keys to the Gym, because that was the most important thing. That was cool, having the keys to the gym. And as you know, love just talking the game and watching you guys work. So thanks for having me. I enjoy that.
Well, that's what this is all about, right? It's just having some fun with it. As you just said, you're always being fortunate to have the keys to the gym. But the reality is, folks, like, there's hoops everywhere, right? So if you want to lace them up and find a game, you got to figure out a way to get yourself there, right? Because you can find it if you want it. And so with that, we're going to sign off for this week. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon. Thanks so much.
See you guys.